See, the way whistleblower concept is used in India is very different to what it's used in the West and in WikiLeaks and the West usually talk about whistleblowers as people within an organization exposing secrets of that organization. We have those also, and I think their identity protection is important, and it's also important.
But like Prashant was saying, the RTI means you don't know where it's coming from.
But in India, the people you were mentioning earlier who've been attacked or killed are people who were not within that system, who were from outside the system, and for that you need a different sort of protection. Now, we've been arguing for a long time that, you see, it's not practical to provide each person like that with a police card. I mean, you know, that's not practical. Besides, you'll find people will then claim that they are being threatened because they'd like to have two cops behind them. So, you know. So we've come up with a suggestion, which the CIC incidentally has accepted and passed a resolution, that if any person who's trying to expose something is seriously attacked or, God forbid, killed, the responsibility of the Information and the Commission and the government must be to immediately release all the information that he or she was trying to get out. So that I am hoping for a time when, if I start getting information about you, you would actually protect me. Because you'd be worried that if something happens to me, God forbid I get run over by a car, all that information you're trying to hold back will come out. And this is not a new strategy. It was used earlier by the New York police, etc., etc.
Was it successful?
So, and was very successful in New York. Now, what I'm trying to say is that therefore we need to encourage that, and I totally agree with him that whereas I have great admiration for WikiLeaks and I think it's performing a wonderful function where it is performing, in India we need a different sort of a setup, which we already have to some extent. See, we do, and it's correct to talk about the 15 or 20 people attacked, but he talked about 6 lakh central government. Our figure is that there are about between 5 and 7 million applications last year on RTI across the country. Now, in 7 million applications, if you have 2 people who are attacked, I think it's a wonderful percentage. I wish those 2 didn't occur.
Of course.
But it's not something that we have to say, oh God, this whole thing is collapsing.
Going back to Kristen Hansen in London, now WikiLeaks of course has caused quite a flutter across the world, not just in India, whether it was Iraq, the cables in Afghanistan. Ambassador K.C. Singh was mentioning the Arab Spring possibly started because of WikiLeaks and the movement in India, anti-corruption. Now also the Occupy Wall Street movement as well.
Yes, I think we are seeing a change of tides. We are seeing, I believe, all over the world, a movement of people that are rising up to the system of corruption, which we have so clearly seen. The financial crisis of 2008 and the aftermath have exposed the wrongdoing and the corruption within the financial sector, which is infested with greed and has had very serious consequences. We have basically seen that over the last decade or two, an escalation in secrecy, and under the cloud of secrecy, corruption has been breeding, and this is something that people are fortunately rising up to, and we are hopefully seeing a new beginning, not just in the Arab world, but all over the world.
Ambassador K.C. Singh, Tunisia, Saleh in Yemen, we saw all the effects of those cables coming out.
You see, as a global power, what has happened is that, like a sausage factory, they said, you shouldn't go to it. It's a very, very ugly work. So US diplomacy behind the scenes, they were supporting all kinds of undesirable leaders. And it's not always principled. You can't always have a moral approach in diplomacy. It's always real politics combined with morality. And I think that has been uncovered by these cables. This has happened to US before. It's not the first time. We've seen the New York Times publishing the papers about Vietnam. And, you know, US government tried very, very hard that it should not come out. And at that stage, this kind of a disclosure thing was still in the making. But they came out. And then you found a president of the US having to resign over having lied to the country. And finally, you had Reagan and Iran-Contra. Each time US has come out stronger. Therefore, in a democracy, there should be no fear for such information to come out. It has affected US interests, but US has taken it on the chin.
Sure.
They've gone along with it. And I think Obama has been very brave. And they've even sacrificed somebody like Mubarak, because they realize that if you have to fight radical Islam, You can't be fighting radical Islam in Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan or all over the world and then seen as backing dictators who are seen as appointed by you and who are not answerable to their people. They realize it's a very difficult transition, but this transition, in a sense, started with when the cables uncovered the frank assessment of US of some of these leaders in Tunisia, Saleh in Yemen, and so on and so forth, and the people there who suspected it all along, but they had it from the Americans right there on the television screens.
People would say that there's nothing new that came out of those cables, or little that new that came out, but it was at least officially known. Everyone knew about these stories, but they were hearsay. Or
sometimes it's a combination of factors, and then there's a fission, and that's what happens.
We saw a lot of material that came out about the CIA, also various views. Intelligence activities, do you think they should be out there in the open?
Well, intelligence activities carried out abroad is something which I think if we apply the rule as Ambassador K.C. Singh said, that disclosure after 30 years or 50 years or something may be considered, but otherwise it's something that would harm the country's interests. So I think out here what we are seeing is the US taking a position against Assange and WikiLeaks, which A, it would consider as an outside element, not as an American element, and B, as harming US national interests. And I think there, time will tell us whether I'm right or not, but I think the US public will tend to back the US government in its moves against Assange and WikiLeaks.
Right, we'll slip it to a short break and come back and again ask the WikiLeaks spokesperson exactly what they was saying. Should some information not be out there in the public if it's affecting the security of the country, if it's in the so-called national interest, and who really decides the national interest of a country? Welcome back. Whistleblowing, is it a necessity for change? Let's go back to Kristen Hrafnsson, the WikiLeaks spokesperson in London via video phone. Mr. Hrafnsson, what would you say to those who say what you've been doing on your website halts or creates problems for the democratic process, in the sense that things happen behind closed doors, policy matters, sensitive matters which should not reach the public domain, and that it also, some people say, hijacks democratic statecraft?
I am a strong supporter of democracy, and the fundamental feature of democracy is transparency. If you don't have transparency, you don't have accountability, and if you don't have accountability, you do not have real democracy. So what we are basically fighting for is the principle of real democracy.
Mr. Hrafnsson, is transparency an absolute necessity in every situation? Say if there's a tricky situation, Ambassador K.C. Singh was also pointing out, say a situation between countries like India and Pakistan, for example, there's backdoor diplomacy going on between them, which they do not want to disclose till something, as he said, is actually cooked. They don't want to make it public before a big announcement is made that could hurt the whole process. Some would say that they are thinking before the two countries reach an agreement, and it could be detrimental if you harm that you release material while a process is on.
There is all kinds of assertions that have risen up since we started publishing the diplomatic cables in the end of November last year. There was a claim that this would lead to the end of diplomacy. This has been totally wrong. What I think we have been seeing at this time has been an indication that diplomacy and the relations between nations are getting more healthier and more open because they are more transparent. And this is something, a trend that we should see continue. There is a need for openness in the dealings between governments. That is obvious.
Openness in dealings, Ambassador, but what we've seen, at least with WikiLeaks, is something post the event. If an event is actually ongoing and something like this comes out, is that
not very much post, because some of the cables out of Beijing are 2009 and very useful, because we've seen them making a complaint to China about material going to Pakistan for the missile program. So some of those are very, very important for us, though Chinese are embarrassed, Americans are embarrassed. 1-2 years is not that period. This can't be a reality show. There's a difference between running a government diplomacy and a reality show. You can't have a camera following you everywhere. Otherwise, you might as well invite NDTV along rather than going there. So there has to be space available to a government. But nevertheless, whistleblowing is a different matter. This wasn't whistleblowing. This was en masse theft of data en masse, unselected, complete, trunk full of it, and given to these people. Whistleblowing is selective, where somebody within the system feels some wrong is being done or about to be done. That's an entirely different category. That can be contemporaneous in order to stop any government from doing something wrong.
Good point.
But certainly grey area, there would be a large area where governance, diplomacy cannot be conducted unless there is privacy. People will not speak frankly, they will not give opinion frankly, they'll start posturing. The same thing happens, you've seen question our Parliament.
Sure.
People know the cameras are on, the behavior is entirely different.
The behavior is not different here. Prashant Iyengar, assistant professor with the Jindal Law School, I must correct the earlier designation we had given out for you. Do you agree with the moral judgment about Bradley Manning's cables that was a theft and that's not really whistleblowing?
No, I think that's, I mean, theft always calls into question the question of ownership. I mean, how did the, how does the government establish its moral claim to the ownership over that property, which is data in this case?
Data, but it's official communications.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's simply resolved by the fact that the government is the one that generated that data. This is extremely sensitive data, important for the functioning of, I mean, it's information that pertains to the functioning of every country, of every country's people. So I think that, before asserting such a strong claim of ownership over that property, so that, any removal of that becomes theft, I think, governments need to introspect in a certain way. How did they, does that give them the license to say anything and everything,
Is their problem.
and get away with it with impunity?
Right. Well, governments need to introspect, and the government is introspecting on this subject. So let me ask Kristen Hafnison, a last subject via video phone from London. In India, there's a lot of political interest and even layman interest, Mr. Hafnison, in what we call black money stashed abroad. Would you share with us if WikiLeaks could ever make public the series of secret accounts, say that CD that was talked about of Swiss bank whistleblower Mr. Elmer, with names be published, if you get the money that you're saying you need to go on doing what you're doing?
Mr. Elmer's position is a delicate one because of legal proceedings, so I would decline to comment on his position or anything in relation to that. But we have shown in the past that we are unafraid of exposing corruption within the financial sector. It has happened before with information about from Julius Baer, the bank. It has happened with information from the inside of corporate banks from my home country, Iceland. So there are frequent instances in the past where we have exposed wrongdoing in the financial sector, and we will certainly continue to do so.
Right, you continue to do so, but you're still looking for that money, various sources. You were talking about money coming from India, possibly through SMSs. It would be a political bomb if you could actually, or anyone, any whistleblower could get out those names of people who are stashing money abroad. Kristen Hafnison, spokesperson of WikiLeaks from London, thanks so much for joining us, and our informed panel, thanks for having an extremely fruitful discussion here. Jaydev Ranade, Mr. Shekhar Singh, Prashant Iyengar, and Ambassador K.C. Singh. Thanks so much for watching Left, Right and Center. Good night.